temperature in Harlem that night was 28 degrees. It was February 8th, 1934. The kind of cold that doesn't just sit on your skin, it burrows into your bones and waits there. The wind whipped off the Harlem River, carrying the smell of dead fish and industrial oil. But inside the basement of the abandoned textile warehouse on 145th Street, the air was hot. It was hot with the smell of kerosene. It was hot with the stench of unwashed bodies. And it was hot with the heat of hatred. 15 men stood in that basement. They wore the white robes of the Ku Klux Klan. In the flickering orange light of the lanterns, they looked like ghosts or demons. They were huddled around a table, laughing, planning the destruction of a neighborhood that wasn't theirs. Their leader, a grand dragon named Robert Garrison, stood tall. He was feeling invincible. They had the guns. They had the element of surprise. They had the police in their pocket. Then, the heavy steel door at the top of the stairs creaked open. The laughter died in their throats. 15 heads turned. A single figure stepped out of the shadows and onto the landing. He wasn't wearing a robe. He was wearing a gray wool suit, pressed to perfection, a cashmere overcoat, a black fedora tilted slightly to the left. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson. He walked down the concrete stairs. Click, clack, click, clack. His leather dress shoes echoed against the stone like a metronome counting down the seconds of their lives. He reached the bottom of the stairs. He looked at the 15 men. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply turned his back to them. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a heavy iron key, and inserted it into the basement door's lock. He locked it from the inside. A confused silence hung in the air, thick, suffocating. Robert Garrison, the Grand Dragon, stepped forward. He chuckled, a nervous, arrogant sound. He put his hand on the revolver holstered beneath his robe. "Boy," Garrison sneered, his voice dripping with that particular poison of the entitled, "you just made the biggest mistake of your life. There are 15 of us. You're alone. You really think you can negotiate with us?" Bumpy Johnson turned slowly. His face was a mask of stone. His eyes were dead black oceans. He adjusted his cufflinks. "Negotiate?" Bumpy said. His voice was low, smooth, like gravel grinding under a boot. "You misunderstand the situation." Bumpy took one step forward. "I'm not locked in here with you," Bumpy whispered. "You're locked in here with me." And then the lights went out. To understand the slaughter that happened in that basement, you have to understand the pressure cooker that was Harlem in 1934. The Great Depression had hit Black America with the force of a sledgehammer. Unemployment was pushing 50%. Families were getting evicted. Children were going to bed with stomachs that twisted from hunger. And into that desperation, the Ku Klux Klan saw an opportunity. We tend to think of the Klan as a Southern problem, a nightmare of the Mississippi Delta or the Georgia Pines. But by the 1930s, the infection had spread north. New York, Chicago, Detroit. They followed the Great Migration like wolves trailing a herd. In Harlem, the Klan couldn't march openly in the streets. They would have been torn apart. So they operated in the shadows. They were the monsters under the bed. Anonymous letters slipped under doors saying "get out" or "burn." Bricks thrown through the windows of black-owned businesses. And at night, the terrifying glow of crosses burning on rooftops. The message was clear. You are not safe here. This is not your home. The people of Harlem went to the police. They begged for protection. But the NYPD in 1934 was a brotherhood of a different color. Many officers were sympathetic to the Klan. Some were members. When a black shop owner reported a threat, the desk sergeant would shrug. "No witnesses," they'd say. "Probably just kids pranking you." Fear paralyzed the community. Pastors slept with shotguns under their pillows. Fathers walked their daughters to school with hammers in their pockets. The Klan was winning. They were ruling through terror. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed Harlem was defenseless. They assumed that because the law wouldn't protect these people, no one would. They forgot about Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He was a criminal, a numbers runner, an enforcer. He had done time in the hardest prisons in America. He knew violence not as a theory, but as a language. To the outside world, he was a gangster. But to Harlem, he was something else. He was a necessary monster, a wall that stood between the people and the wolves. On February 7th, his spies brought him the intel. "They're meeting tomorrow night," the informant whispered, trembling. "An abandoned warehouse by the river, 15 of them. They're bringing gasoline. They're planning to burn down the orphanage on 135th. Bumpy's lieutenants stood up. They reached for their Thompson submachine guns. They reached for their shotguns. "We'll wipe them out, Bumpy," one of them said. "We'll take 20 men. We'll turn that warehouse into a sieve." Bumpy sat in his chair, staring at the ash on his cigar. He was silent for a long time. "No," Bumpy said. He looked up. There was no anger in his eyes, only a cold, terrifying resolve. "No guns," Bumpy said. "Guns are too quick. Guns are impersonal. These men are trying to use fear. They want to scare my people?" Bumpy stood up and buttoned his jacket. "I'm going to show them what fear really looks like, and I'm going alone." The walk to the river took 20 minutes. Bumpy Johnson moved through the streets of Harlem like a wraith. He left the vibrant, jazz-filled avenues of central Harlem and descended into the industrial wasteland at the edge of the city. This was the forgotten part of the neighborhood. The factories were dark skeletons against the night sky. The steam rising from the manholes looked like spirits escaping the earth. The wind cut through his coat, but Bumpy didn't shiver. His heart rate didn't spike. His hands didn't shake. Most men walking toward a room with 15 armed fanatics would be praying. They would be terrified. Bumpy Johnson was doing math. He was calculating angles. He was visualizing the layout of a basement he had never seen. He was cataloging the damage a human body can take before it shuts down. He reached the warehouse at 11:35 p.m. It was a brick tomb, sitting alone near the water. The windows were boarded up. The only sign of life was a faint orange glow leaking from the cracks in the basement covering. He could hear them, muffled voices, laughter, the arrogance of men who think they are the predators. Bumpy adjusted his fedora. He checked the straight razor in his right pocket. He checked the weighted leather sap in his left. He took a deep breath of the freezing air, filling his lungs with the night. He wasn't walking into a trap. He was the trap. Back in the basement, the echo of the locking door had faded, replaced by the heavy breathing of 15 confused men. "You're locked in here with me." When Bumpy said those words, the dynamic in the room fractured. For a split second, the Klan members felt something they had never felt in Harlem before: vulnerability. But numbers breed false confidence. "Get him!" Garrison screamed, pointing a finger. "Kill this—" The man nearest to Bumpy, a hulking brute named Miller, lunged. He had a knife in his belt, but he didn't reach for it. He thought he could crush this intruder with his size. He was wrong. Bumpy didn't step back. He stepped in. Bumpy's movement was a blur, a piston-like jab, not to the face, but to the throat. The sound was like stepping on a dry twig. Miller's windpipe collapsed. He didn't scream. He couldn't. He made a gurgling, wheezing sound and dropped to his knees, clawing at his neck, drowning in his own panic. 1 down, 14 to go. The brutality of the move froze the room for a heartbeat. This wasn't a bar fight. This was an execution. "Shoot him!" someone yelled. 3 men reached for their pistols under their robes. Bumpy kicked the table in the center of the room. It was a heavy oak table, covered with maps and kerosene lamps. It slammed into the 3 gunmen, knocking them off balance. The kerosene lamps wobbled, tipped, fell. The glass shattered. The fuel spilled. Fire erupted across the concrete floor, creating a wall of flame between the clan members and the exit Bumpy had locked. The crossbar connected with the side of a clan member's head. The man spun in the air like a rag doll and hit the wall, sliding down into a heap. Now the panic set in, true primal panic. These were men who were used to intimidation. They were used to scaring families in the middle of the night. They were not warriors. They were bullies, and bullies crumble when the victim bites back. "Open the door!" one of them screamed, pounding on the steel. "Let us out!" Bumpy was a shark in a fish tank. He moved with terrifying economy, no wasted motion. Every strike broke a bone. Every step cut off an angle of escape. He dodged a wild punch and drove his elbow into a man's solar plexus. The man folded. Bumpy grabbed the back of his head and drove his face into the brick wall. Another man tried to aim a pistol. Bumpy didn't run from the gun. He closed the distance. He grabbed the barrel, twisting it with such force that the man's trigger finger snapped with a loud pop. The scream pierced the smoky air. Bumpy headbutted the gunman. The sound of skull on nose was sickening. The man dropped. It was chaos. Smoke filled the room, stinging their eyes, filling their lungs. The only thing they could see was Bumpy Johnson, calm, silent, dismantling them one by one. He pulled the straight razor. He didn't use it to kill. He used it to mark, to terrify. Slash, a robe fell open, red blooming on a chest. Slash, a hand holding a knife was suddenly useless, tendons severed. He was fast, so fast. Garrison, the Grand Dragon, was backing away, terror in his eyes. He had lost his gun in the scuffle. He was watching his army fall. "Who are you?" Garrison whimpered. He was pressed against the locked door, nowhere to go. "What are you?" Bumpy stopped. He stood in the center of the room. 12 men lay on the floor around him. Some were unconscious. Some were groaning in agony. Some were trying to crawl away from the fire. Bumpy's knuckles were bruised. His suit was splattered with blood that wasn't his. He wasn't breathing hard. He looked at Garrison. He looked at the 2 other men still standing, shaking in the corner. Bumpy slowly folded the razor and put it back in his pocket. The violence ended as quickly as it had begun. 8 minutes, that's all it took. The basement was a ruin. The air smelled of burnt wood, copper blood, and human waste. 12 men were on the floor, unable to stand, but 3 were left, Garrison and 2 of his lieutenants. They were huddled in the corner, clutching each other, their white robes stained with soot and grime. They waited for the death blow. They waited for Bumpy to pull a gun and finish it. Bumpy walked over to them. He stepped over the body of the man he had hit with the cross. He loomed over Garrison. The Grand Dragon, the man who had promised to burn Harlem to the ground, was now sobbing like a child. Bumpy leaned in close. His face was inches from Garrison's. "I could kill you," Bumpy whispered. "Right now. No one would know. No one would care." Garrison squeezed his eyes shut. "But dead men don't talk," Bumpy said. He grabbed Garrison by the lapels of his robe and slammed him against the wall. "You're gonna leave here," Bumpy said. "You're gonna crawl out of this hole, and you're gonna tell every friend you have, every clan member in New York, you tell them what lives in Harlem." Bumpy released him. "You tell them that we are not the prey anymore. We are the hunters." Bumpy turned his back on them. He walked to the steel door. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the iron key. He unlocked it. The heavy click echoed. The cold night air rushed in, swirling with the smoke. Bumpy stepped out onto the landing. He adjusted his tie. He brushed a speck of dust off his shoulder. He didn't look back. "You run," he said. And they ran. The 3 survivors scrambled over the bodies of their fallen comrades, tripping, falling, clawing their way up the stairs and into the night, never looking back. The next morning, an anonymous tip led the NYPD to the warehouse. Detectives found 12 men in the basement, broken bones, concussions, severe burns. It looked like a bomb had gone off.
But when they identified the victims, when they saw the robes, the Klan literature, the maps of black churches, the captain made a decision. There was no investigation, there were no arrests. The police report filed that day listed the incident as an accidental structural collapse during an unauthorized gathering. They buried it. They didn't want the city to know the Klan was operating in New York, and they certainly didn't want to admit that one black man had done their job for them. But the streets knew. The 3 survivors did exactly what Bumpy told them to do. They talked. They spread the fear. They told stories of a demon in a gray suit who locked the door and hunted them down. They told stories of a man who couldn't be hurt, who moved faster than a shadow. And the Ku Klux Klan? They never held another meeting in Harlem. The cross-burning stopped. The threats ceased. The White Hoods vanished from uptown New York, chased away not by the law, not by the government, but by the legend of one man. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was a criminal. He was a gangster. History will tell you he was a bad man. But on that freezing night in February 1934, he was the only line of defense a terrified community had. Some heroes wear capes. Some wear badges. Bumpy Johnson wore a fedora, carried a straight razor, and possessed the kind of darkness that could scare the devil himself. He locked the door on hate, and he taught the world a lesson that Harlem never forgot. If you come for the king, you better not miss. And if you come for his people, you better make sure the door is unlocked.